planners are at the forefront of legislative changes like Bill 23 and the housing shortage challenges. And if you know a planner, thank them.
Bill 23, definitely substantially more impactful to the conservation authorities.
It's a lot more alarming than actually I had thought.
I try not to keep awake at nights with these kinds of things, but this is coming really close, I must say.
Everyone is riding the curtails on writing these letters and getting them to the Ford government.
We'll just get ourselves rolling. Tonight's topic is, I'd like to say hot. I think it might actually be scorching around land use. And we all need to be thinking about land use, and both in terms of our communities and our, farms and conservation areas. But the threats are real to this. So it's timely that we decided to focus on this evening. Also the evening that I think a lot of consultation feedback was due in. Around Bill 23, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. Megan's going to take over kind of being the host for us tonight. So Megan, I think lots of you will know Megan Miles. She's someone who's been super committed to being a community servant and also a servant to the land and to the planet in the work that she's done in Bruce County, in particular Northern Bruce Peninsula. She grew up on the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula, and in 2016, Megan opened the Fitz Hostel in Lions Head, and in 2018, thankfully, became a councillor in Northern Bruce Peninsula and served as council rep on the Climate Action Committee. She's now retired from council. Didn't take up the flame, the torch this time around. For now. I'm sure she's got bigger things in her future, so we'll keep an eye on her. And she's working on an MSc in rural planning, which is super interesting, at the University of Guelph, and doing a thesis around innovative models for attainable housing and senior care. She's been a huge champion of climate action in the area and community building. She doesn't shy away from tough conversations and gnarly, wicked problems, and we've got certainly that kind of thing going on right now. So over to you, Megan, and thanks so much for taking on the co-host function tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jenny, for that very flattering introduction. So I think actually a friend of mine who also was in the rural planning program at Guelph did his thesis or his major research paper on why we do land acknowledgements. I think acknowledging the land and its traditional keepers is important because it recognizes the longstanding relationship that Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have. And it's an opportunity to reflect on our own relationship with the land. I think that's especially important tonight in the context of land use planning. From my role as a municipal councillor and as settlers, we talk a lot about ratepayers and property owners. But really, this land isn't ours. We're stewarding it for a while, and hopefully in a way that considers the next 7 generations. And that's even pretty hard to conceptualize what 7 generations means. My family's been on the peninsula for 5, and I don't even know the names of the people who were before that. So with that said, I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the 3 fires known as Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen, the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. So before we get into kind of the land use planning piece, I wanted to pose a question, and that question is, just how are folks feeling about the municipal election results? This is our first climate forum since the election results. I know probably some of you were watching, and we have some elected officials on the call today. So I'm just going to launch a poll and you can answer. Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling neutral? Are you feeling discouraged? Not sure. Okay, so 56% feeling excited and hopeful. So that's good. 14% neutral, and yeah, about the other three split 3 ways. So yeah, I think there definitely were a lot of wins throughout Grey and Bruce in terms of climate champions being elected to council. I know in North Bruce Peninsula, we were lucky to have a climate-focused all candidates meeting, which was really great. And yeah, that was definitely a way to kind of bring climate into the agenda. And also, we were talking prior to, I think it is a really important opportunity as committee appointments are being made in these next month or two. I think it is a really important time to engage with your new councils. And also as they're preparing for their first budget process. If it's a committee of council, I think we ran into this challenge. You need to be careful about kind of advocacy and making sure that you have a really good terms of reference and it's clear and everyone has a good committee orientation. But yeah, so for those municipalities that are looking to strike a climate action committee as a committee of council, or if you don't have, I know in Grey County, they have their upper tier plan, which is great. And then in Bruce County, there's a couple of us that have lower tier plans. So if that's something that's kind of on your radar for your community, definitely it's great to engage council early. So today we're talking about something that these newly elected councils will have to deal with a lot, and that's land use planning. Official plans, zoning bylaw amendments, and from what I recall 4 years ago, it was a pretty steep learning curve. But we have our municipal planners that are able to guide us towards good planning practice. So what is planning? Planning is the deliberate activity of developing an optimal strategy for future action to achieve a desired state of goals for solving problems intended by the power and intention to commit resources and to act to implement the chosen strategy. And I think Scott and Claire, our panelists for tonight, they're going to go into this a little bit more, but this is generally the planning hierarchy in Ontario, where we have the overarching Planning Act, and the provincial policy statement, and then the official plan zoning bylaws, that's under the jurisdiction of the lower tiers. So this is kind of generally how it all works. And we at the municipal and lower tier and upper tier level, we're creatures of the province. So as counselors and planners, we're constantly assessing the trade-offs between conservation versus development, because we're desperately in need of more housing, in particularly affordable housing. And once something's paved over, it rarely gets rehabilitated back to green space. And this is especially a concern in rural areas where we do have so much green space to lose and farmland. On the peninsula, we have the largest intact forest and connected forest in southern Ontario, provincially significant wetlands. So yeah, and if we want to continue to maximize carbon sinks, we want to maximize this green space. So perhaps you're on the call because you've seen the headlines about Bill 23 and want to learn more, or you've read about it and you're totally fired up. And it's pretty concerning. We've been seeing headlines like this, and Doug Ford seems to love these omnibus bills where there's sweeping changes to multiple pieces of legislation. And there's quite a tight consultation timeline that municipalities and other organizations rarely have the capacity to fully wrap their heads around and respond in time. And as we were talking about before we started letting folks in, I'm sure the conversation will get back to a lot of the municipalities, their councils haven't even been sworn in yet. So that definitely poses a challenge. Consulting and providing comments on these pieces of legislation is in addition to, a planner's day-to-day of processing applications and this ever increasing volume of planning applications and site plan applications and updating important strategic planning documents like official plans. Looking at some of these changes, I think a lot of us have probably already come to the conclusion that we while we do want more housing, I think we're asking whether or not where that housing is, and if this type of legislative change promotes desirable development. Now, since I've started studying planning at the University of Guelph, we talk a lot about planning for the public interest, and we are realizing that there's multiple publics and multiple interests, and not only for people today, but also for 7 generations to come. What is good planning? Does it look like this? Or does it look like this? We talk about greenfields, which is in the context of new development, or infill or brownfield development, which is redevelopment of existing footprints. But really, one of the, Wayne Caldwell is on the call tonight, and I'm currently in his class, Healthy Rural Communities, and something that we've talked a lot about is active transportation. And this really requires intensification within our downtown cores. So that means brownfields instead of greenfields, keeping our footprint contained and not suburban sprawl, concentrating our housing and amenities within walking or biking distance, so it's more accessible for seniors, youth, or people who don't have access to a car. It also means more diversity, so different uses, mixed housing, mixed development. We need those corner general stores and cafes that are within our residential neighborhoods, and the commercial space that's down below, and residential apartments above, like we see on some of these older main streets, like in Owen Sound. Our healthy rural built environments, they have a lot of different kind of components to making them healthy. Yeah, that was a bit of just like a primer on thinking about what good development looks like or could look like. However, now I'm going to turn it over to both our Bruce and Gray directors of planning, who know way, way more about planning and development than I do. We have Scott Taylor, who's the director of planning and development for Gray County. Scott's a registered professional planner and has been with Gray for 17 years. He's also an active volunteer with the Ontario and Canadian Provincial Planning Associations. We also have Clair Dodds, who is the Director of Planning at Bruce County. She has over 20 years of experience working with multiple levels of government, leading teams to facilitate development approvals and develop policy. She started her planning career at Huron County, and then worked with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, South Frontenac, and now we're lucky to have her in Bruce County. And with that, I'll turn it over to you two.
All right, thanks, Megan. And thank you everyone for inviting us here tonight. I guess I'm going to start things off on behalf of Claire and I, and then Claire will take over on the second half. I am going to share my screen here with a bit of a presentation. Okay, so actually I really like Megan's definition of planning. I used to always start presentations like this with a bit of a joke, but the one definition I heard was that planners solve problems you didn't know you had in a complicated way you don't understand. But I don't honestly believe that's true, but that's sometimes the reputation we have. When we're doing presentations to kids classes to teach children about planning, one of the things I often say is planners like to think about what should go where and why. And that's just a little bit about what we think about in that regard, but I'll get to it here. So as Megan said, we have Claire with us today from Bruce County. Claire has recently rejoined Bruce County as the Director of Planning. She's got an extensive planning history. I think I first met Claire when she was at the County of Huron, and in my opinion, from an outsider's perspective, the County of Huron always had and still has this reputation of being a really innovative and open-minded planning department. And so really excited that Claire's back in our area and bringing that approach to Bruce County as well. She's worked for both Huron and Bruce, as well as the province, and the Director of Development Services with the Township of South Frontenac. Claire grew up in this area and was raised on a farm. With respect to myself, I've been at Gray for a while now, just recently started in the director's role. I also grew up on various farms and have a great interest in planning in this regard. just similar to what Megan shared with us, planning in Ontario is governed by a number of things. First and foremost, we have a piece of provincial legislation called the Planning Act. Underneath the Planning Act, we have the provincial policy statement, which in a way acts almost like an official plan for the province. It sets high-level goals for planning decisions in the province that planners like Claire and myself have to make recommendations that are consistent with. Across the province, we also have a variety of provincial plans. Notably in this area, we have the Niagara Escarpment Plan. There's also the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan and the Growth Plan. And then below that, we have our county and municipal official plans, followed by the zoning bylaws. In general terms, municipalities carry out planning through both our official plans and our zoning bylaws, and I'll get into more of what those are in just a second. Planners generally do a lot of the consultation, we do research, we give advice, and typically it's our politicians that would make the decisions. And as I said, planning decisions in Ontario must be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and the processes around planning are set out and governed by the Planning Act. So first we have, in terms of our planner's toolkit, if you will, we have our official plans. So an official plan is a broad policy document. Just recently, as of 2020, we now have the ability to look 25 years into the future. So that's what's called the planning horizon of the official plan. And just because the official plan looks 25 years into the future doesn't mean at municipalities and counties we're not also thinking further. And certainly those First Nations philosophies of looking 7 generations into the future are quite interesting and definitely something we take to heart. When I say that an official plan is a policy document, what I mean by that is they set out broad policies and goals and objectives for what we want our communities to look like as they grow and evolve over time. They do so by including maps, which we often call as land use schedules or appendices, as well as text to describe the vision for how we want our communities to grow in that regard. And so with that, we have, official plan land use designation. So what you see the map there on the left-hand side of the screen is just a broad map for Northern Grey. You see the brown areas, which are the agricultural areas. The gray is the Niagara Escarpment, and the red are some of our cities and towns in that regard. Official plans need to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, but the provincial policy statement is written at a broad level for the entire province. So in our official plans at the county level, we can fill in more of the details there and insert some of the visions and objectives that pertain more specifically to our little area of the province. Municipal official plans, should a municipality choose to adopt an official plan, can get more detailed and can get into more of the character elements and specifics of a community, whether it be a hamlet or a village, or whether it be a small city or urban area. Official plans, through their mapping, protect our natural resource area or natural heritage areas, including wetlands and woodlands. They also look at what's appropriate in our agricultural and rural areas and provide detailed policies for our growth areas, which are generally our settlement areas in that regard. Municipal official plans, can be more detailed or restrictive than a county official plan, but based on the legislative framework in Ontario, a municipal official plan cannot conflict with the county plan, so they need to slot in and conform underneath the county official plans. And it's important to note that an official plan is not applicable law. And so sometimes we hear criticisms of planners or criticisms of individual counties or municipalities to say that County X is not enforcing their official plan. Well, I appreciate that comment as something that a member of the public may think or an organization may think. It's actually the zoning bylaws that are the enforcement tool. So if you were to go to apply for a building permit on your property, the building official is going to measure whether or not you can or can't get that building permit by the zoning bylaw, not necessarily by the official plan. Oops, sorry. With respect to zoning bylaws, they are the key tool for implementing the official plan. A zoning bylaw is enforceable law. which municipalities are in charge of enforcing. And zoning bylaws get into the nitty-gritty details. So they would get into things like your parking standards, your exact permitted uses, setbacks that get applied to each zone. And so you might have multiple residential zones in each community that get into different details on whether you want high or low density dwellings in that area, or mixed use areas with commercial and residential, or different types of breakdowns like that. And zoning bylaws in Gray and Bruce are the responsibility of our member municipalities, not at the county level. And so this is just a little example of an official plan for Kincardine. What you see is the various different residential zones. You can see the downtown commercial zones, and each of those zones is followed by detailed zone standards, which would tell you how big the lots need to be, what types of permitted uses can be there. You can see our natural heritage systems in terms of the rivers and the floodplains, the open space areas, and these are the very detailed, as I said, nitty-gritty of the planning tools, and these are the enforcement tools in that regard too. So if you see somebody charged for not being in compliance with a zoning bylaw, this is the tool by which they'd lay those charges. With respect to planning in Gray County, we are a two-tier municipal government. Gray County has 9 member municipalities, and we have planning that's done at both the county level and at our member municipal level. In Gray's case, we have a county official plan, and 8 of our 9 member municipalities also have their own official plans. In a number of cases in Gray, the member municipalities choose to focus their municipal official plans on their settlement and growth areas and defer to the county official plan for some of the rural and agricultural and special agricultural areas. Gray is also lucky enough to be bisected by the Niagara Escarpment. The Niagara Escarpment also has a provincial plan, and so a number of the sections of the Gray official plan defer to the Niagara Escarpment plan in that regard. Gray is also home to the jurisdiction of 4 separate conservation authorities. I know we have Tim on the call with us today from the Gray Sawmill Conservation Authority, but we also have the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, the Grand River Conservation Authority, and the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority. With respect to some recent Gray County initiatives that may be pertinent to the audience here tonight, we are lucky enough to have a very supportive council and a very forward-looking council, and particularly this outgoing council has recently passed a climate change action plan. So this is Gray's Going Green in Gray. It's our mitigation plan to look at both corporate and community emissions across the county. I'm here presenting with you tonight, but it really is through the hard work of Linda Swanston, Hibba Hussein, and our consultant Ikli Kenda that did a lot of the legwork on this plan. But it's also thanks to people like yourselves on the call today that gave us great feedback. And some of you may remember we released a draft climate change plan, and resoundingly the feedback we got was there's no teeth to it. It's not strong enough. It's not aggressive enough. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with, in my opinion, a better plan in that regard. The Climate Change Action Plan is separate from our county official plan, but it does inform our county official plan in that regard. The county has recently made changes to the county's official plan through what was called Official Plan Amendment number 11 to implement some of the early directions of the Climate Change Action Plan. Some of the directions through there looked at enshrining those corporate and community net zero targets into the county official plan. We looked at areas where it might be appropriate to have increased residential density. There's new policies on dark skies. There's policies on the adaptive reuse of buildings. You know, quite often we've heard the greenest building is the one that's already standing. So what can we do to preserve some of those older buildings and reuse those? There's new policies that guide our member municipalities in their community improvement plans to look at maybe incenting more energy efficiency. We've outlined the fact that Gray is going to be proposing to develop a green development standard in the year 2023. And we've also put in policies around tiny homes, renewable energy, and waste diversion. So as staff, we're really excited to be working with the community, working with our incoming council to start to implement some of the action items from the Going Green in Gray Climate Change Action Plan. And we hope in 2023 to be developing this green development standard, which we will be looking for feedback from the community on. So with that, that is the end of my portion, and I'll turn it over to Claire and let her take you through her portions.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And thank you for extending the invite to Bruce County to be here this evening to share a little bit about what's happening in Bruce and also help share some information that I'm sure many folks have plugged into in terms of some of the changing legislative environment within which we do our work. So I had the privilege of getting to meet Scott quite a number of years ago. We won't focus on the math. But it's a real privilege to be working next door to Scott and his team, certainly showing a lot of leadership in the space around climate change adaptation and what that starts to look like with really good, strong policies in official plan documents. So all municipalities work on slightly different timelines and schedules. In Bruce County, I've been in my position as director now for about 2 months. And so it's been great getting to know the Bruce County team and the Bruce County municipalities. And we are a team that extends right across Bruce County. We do our work predominantly out of 3 hub offices, with a hub in Wyerton for that deals with a lot of the geography on the peninsula. Another lakeshore hub out of Port Elgin, which deals with a lot of our waterfront planning and planning in municipalities of Kincardine and Saugeen Shores, and then an inland hub, which focuses a lot on the agricultural and resource planning, and also area planning for municipalities such as Brockton, Huron, Kinloss, and beyond. We do deliver day-to-day land use planning services for our member municipalities, the 8 municipalities, as well as performing the responsibility of acting as the upper tier, and oftentimes we do have to act in terms of making decisions as if we are and sit in the role of the province of Ontario and through their delegated authority to us. And so we take that role on when we're looking at approving local municipal official plans, for instance. Part of the Bruce County geography is the peninsula, the escarpment, Niagara Escarpment. And so similar to Grey County, we do have the Niagara Escarpment Commission that enforces the Niagara Escarpment Plan and works with our team in terms of dealing with approvals in that area. We do have, similar to Grey, one less conservation authority that we work with, but also work in partnership across the watershed with Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, and Tim's here on the call tonight, and also the Saugeen Valley and Maitland Valley Conservation Authorities as well. So in terms of some of the strategic pieces that are happening in Bruce County, we are working actively on developing a new official plan for the county as a whole. That project has began in 2018 and 2019, where there was some broad-based community consultation through our Bruce GPS project that perhaps some of your membership were part of. And so we engaged with 1,800 people that helped us really shape the vision for the Bruce County and ultimately our official plan exercise that we're working through. Through 2020 and 21, we undertook 8 different background reports focusing on different land use areas such as agriculture, homes, heritage, connecting, natural legacy, which is a significant portion of mapping and refining our natural heritage features, good growth, and looking at community growth, and also how business can be supported through our official plan policies. Through the latter part of 2022, we did adopt an official plan amendment, which establishes a comprehensive growth management framework for right across the county and really spells out population growth and allocation across the county. And so into 23, obviously we're coming through the elections, as was mentioned right at the outset. And one of the key pieces that we will be moving ahead with our new council is the development of a whole new official plan, building off the work that we've been doing over the last few years. Move ahead, Scott. So I'll take us, so Scott did a really great job in terms of giving a high level overview in terms of the function and kind of the function and details of an official plan and zoning bylaw. My slides are going to focus a little bit more with the balance of time that's left around some of the rapid legislative change that we're experiencing in municipal government across Ontario, whether you're working at an upper tier or a local municipality. Certainly through my career, having practiced for a little over 20 years, the last number of years, we have seen more legislative change and fundamental change. And change can have lots of elements that are good and positive and helpful in terms of addressing different aspects of change that we're seeing as a society. But we also want to make sure that we are providing comments into the province, who is really the driver of those legislative changes, about the impacts and what the sometimes unintended consequences are in our local communities. And so that's often a role that folks such as Scott and I play in terms of commenting in and working with our councils to prepare comments for some of this legislative change. So if you've been following along, in spring of 22, we had Bill 109 that was introduced, and it was passed very quickly ahead of the provincial election. It was actually put into effect while we were still in the commenting period. And so that bill really looked to implement at least some initial findings of kind of a homes master plan that the province had undertaken and done some consultation with key stakeholder groups. So I'll speak to Bill 109 in a little bit more detail in a moment, but you may also be interested to know that that bill introduced a new tool called the Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator tool. And so that was a new tool to the Planning Act that essentially allowed for more municipally initiated, kind of equivalent to a municipal zoning order, but would do that in such a way that municipal councils would initiate that through some public consultation and could help move ahead different types of planning approvals more quickly by asking the provincial government to make those changes. In the fall of 22, so October 25th, we had Bill 23 introduced, which is the More Homes Built Faster Act. And subsequent to that, then I'm sure you've been following along as I have, that we have some proposed changes happening now to the Greenbelt Act. And then I do believe it was yesterday, there's also been some changes proposed in terms of extending legislation that initially was in Toronto and Ottawa with the Strong Mayors Act to extend that more broadly into the Greater Golden Horseshoe municipalities and looking at some of the functions of the regions in that geography. So we also have, before the end of the year, the province has indicated that they're looking to do a review of the Places to Grow Act and the provincial policy statement. And as Megan and Scott had highlighted, that's a very fundamental policy document that sets the framework for land use planning in Ontario. We are anticipating further legislation coming forward in spring of 2023. And really the driver behind all of those changes is that the province is looking to develop more homes faster with a target of 1.5 million homes in the next 10 years. So Bill 109 came into effect spring of 2022. And the reason why I'm highlighting this and may be of interest to your group in particular with how engaged you are around, I'm sure, many planning decisions in your geographies. Bill 109 really put in place a framework which was trying to put in place financial penalties, essentially, in order to ensure that municipalities are making decisions on planning matters in a timely fashion. So impacts things like zoning amendments where they're combined with an official plan amendment, and site plan control. So the province established that for zoning bylaw amendments, you've got 90 days as a council to make a decision. So from the time of a complete application to a decision, 90 days to do that work, 120 days when it's a zoning bylaw amendment, combined with a official plan amendment, and 60 days for a site plan application. And if decisions are not made within those timeframes, then essentially you move into a penalty framework. So municipalities would lose 50% of the revenue of those application fees if the decision took longer than the timeframes I outlined. There's then another set of dates for a 75% refund, and if decisions aren't done kind of within 120 to 240 days on different types of applications, 100% of the refund would go back. So as you can imagine, for folks like Scott and I, as we're looking at ensuring that we've got budgets in order to have our qualified planning staff, we want to make sure that we're making decisions in a timely fashion in partnership with our local member municipalities and councils, county council, in order to look to preserve the revenue on which we rely on to maintain our budget. And so that means that we need to look at and review how we deal with applications coming into our process. So spending more time around pre-consultation, making sure that submissions are as complete. Some people use the term perfect applications. I don't know that I've ever seen one, but I welcome the opportunity. And so, you know, there's going to be a lot more upfront work that needs to be done, and probably some different ways in terms of how we do our work. But there is definitely, from a provincial perspective, they want to see our local councils making decisions in a very timely fashion in order to really get more homes to market faster. So I just wanted to highlight that for folks, because you may hear elements of that gets implemented January 1st. So will be a significant component as we move into the new year. And then Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act, as Megan and Scott had mentioned, this is really a fairly major omnibus bill. It touches 9 different pieces of legislation, and we could probably spend the next 3+ hours if we really got into the nitty and gritty of these pieces. We've been consulting with our municipalities, and we do that in about an hour and a half call. So we're going to try to summarize the high level points really quickly for you to at least give you a sense. And then should you wish to do some further reading, there's lots of good resources that are coming out. So I won't go through all of the legislation, but you see it here on the screen that are being impacted at this time. So if you want to move that ahead, Scott. So a couple of the things that I'll draw to your attention, and we've really tried to focus in on some of the most key planning tools that I think are really important across Grey and Bruce County in terms of the work that we do. So fairly major changes to the Planning Act, and one of the most major tools that all municipalities use regularly is site plan control. And oftentimes site plan control is a tool, some of the items that Scott was mentioning around green development standards, you know, looking at putting detailed regulations in place around how you would manage lighting on a site, those types of things. We use the site plan control tool in order to implement those types of agreements and register that on the title of a property. The Planning Act is proposed to remove site plan control for 10 or fewer residential units. So oftentimes in different communities, certainly in Bruce County, if we have a residential build with 10 residential units, that's a really positive thing for growth and development and housing in our local area. Small by scale in terms of what's happening in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, but significant for us. We've certainly used this tool for waterfront planning, and for smaller scale projects, but where there are important conditions to implement at the time of construction. So the province is proposing to remove that tool where there's 10 or fewer units. Also excluding exterior design of buildings and removing our ability to include sustainable design elements as part of a site plan. So that might be something that's of interest to your membership to comment on through Bill 23. One of the things that I think is really quite positive about the changes is I'll focus in on the additional dwelling units that are being proposed. So this is where we're seeing, as of right, additional density, so additional residential units up to 3 in total. permitted as a right in service settlement areas. So where there's already municipal water, already municipal sewer, as of right, you don't need to go through any sort of a planning application to have these 3 residential units. Bruce County was going through the process of amending all of our local official plans and zoning bylaws. So we would have to essentially amend 16 documents in order to do what the province was able to do here with one legislative change. So generally we see that as quite positive. Doesn't address the entirety of additional dwelling units for us out into the rural areas or in our villages and hamlets, but certainly helps speed up the process. So we're quite pleased with that change. We have seen some upper tier municipalities, certainly in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, where their planning responsibilities have been removed, and that's quite concerning. I think as we look at upper tiers as having responsibilities around coordinating, especially infrastructure growth and housing, residential growth, commercial and employment growth, is certainly my perspective would be that there's still an important role there for those upper tier municipalities. We've seen changes in limitations around parkland dedication, and that's largely tied to not being allowed to collect parkland where there's affordable or attainable housing being proposed. And there are certainly some financial implications of that to municipalities that will need to be offset by taxpayers. One other item is that the legislation identifies that public meetings are now optional for plans of subdivision. There's no longer a requirement to have a public meeting or send public notice on those types of applications, so that may be of interest. And third-party appeals have been removed from all planning applications. So previously, if there was a neighbor or somebody who had a vested interest, a community group who was concerned in terms of a planning application, they could file an appeal, provided they were involved in the process, to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And this legislation through Bill 23 proposes to remove that from all types of planning applications. Previously, it was removed from plans of subdivision and condominium. But now that's looking to be extended to all types of planning applications. So something to be aware of. We're also seeing a lot of changes that are impacting our partners at the Conservation Authority and right across Ontario. The legislation really looks to reset and redefine specifically the scope for our Conservation Authority partners, so that being limited to flood protection and natural hazards. Also, there is some legislation which probably needs a little bit more clarity to be able to fully appreciate what the province is proposing by this language. But looking at certain types of permits that may no longer be required from the Conservation Authority, where development has already been approved under the Planning Act, and that would occur in certain prescribed areas. This is one section of the legislation where we don't have a lot of details, and so we don't know where those prescribed areas are or what types of permits might be exempt. So it is something that's of interest. Temporarily freezing fees for all development permits and proposals, providing the minister the power to freeze those fees in the future. I know this is generating a lot of concern, not just for our Conservation Authority partners, but also for municipalities. If fees are frozen, the only source of revenue for conservation authorities outside that is the levy, which is then charged to municipalities. So, you know, the reality is if we want to keep qualified staff, if we want to do the work, we need to make sure that fees are covered, and there's really only 2 sources of how to do that, proponent paid or through essentially the levies to the municipalities. And then also there is removal for consideration of pollution from scope from conservation authorities. I don't see that is an area that a lot of our local conservation authorities have provided comments around, but again, just the province trying to reaffirm the scope of the work from the conservation authorities. And it does also speak to conservation authority lands needing to be inventoried, and that consideration may be made for whether those lands could be used to support housing development. So not a mandatory piece, but certainly a piece that looking at those land holdings and whether there's opportunities. Another change which I expect would be of great interest to this group, and certainly how that ties back into climate change, is looking at the Ontario wetland evaluation system. We know how important wetlands are in terms of regulation for flood events, you know, their ecological significance. And so in some ways, this legislation, at least in my opinion, somewhat clarifies MNRF's role. So that's the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. It used to have a very, very active role in terms of identifying wetlands, and through the last number of years, really have been extremely under-resourced in order to do that work. So this particular regulation proposes to transfer the responsibility really from the province to wetland evaluators, so qualified persons who are licensed to evaluate wetlands, and really give the final authority around wetland identification to municipalities. These broad changes to the way wetlands are evaluated include identifying wetlands based on a number of criteria. And one of the things that we noted is that the concept of a wetland complex is being removed. And so it really does require that all wetlands essentially be evaluated essentially on their own merit as individual sites, rather than considering them as part of a larger complex and a larger, more integrated system in the landscape. There are new guidelines which are being developed to help establish wetlands and look at how those can be evaluated at any time. And really without the role or guidance of the Ministry of Natural Resources. So in some ways, these pieces could potentially be good if you've got a very proactive municipality who has a focused budget in terms of investing in identifying and in mapping and designating these types of wetlands. I think there's some question in terms of the frequency and the review and who can initiate reviews. So again, we'll certainly be providing some comments on this, as I'm sure our Conservation Authority partners will as well. Move ahead, Scott. So in summary, around Bill 23, there's definitely a lot of focus on more affordable and attainable housing. As a whole, we know our communities need this, and we think that this is really an important area that needs to be tackled. And I'm sure in Grey County and with the work that they're doing, I know in Bruce County, we are actively and ahead of this legislation looking at ways that we can move ahead, certainly the affordable housing. Attainable housing is a concept which is just, I would say, more recently introduced through this legislation from the province, and really warrants further definition through prescribed regulation. We don't have a really good sense of what the province is benchmarking attainable housing as, and I think that's raising a lot of questions and concerns about financial impacts of this legislation as well. All the housing targets are focused on the Greater Golden Horseshoe region, with the exception of 4 more broadly across southern and southwestern and southeastern Ontario. Bruce and Grey County do not have any housing targets assigned to us. And so again, it does look like a very GTA kind of focused legislation, but has broad implications that impact our municipalities as well. Changes to reduce costs for developers. It also establishes more consistency for developers across municipalities, and generally developers knowing their fixed costs is important in terms of them looking at, especially moving more into the affordable housing space. But it does have financial implications, quite significant ones for municipalities. And we do need to remove, or it does remove the need to amend planning documents to facilitate additional dwelling units. Again, generally we see that as good, but we are, concerned and have comment and consideration around the legislation and and the way that it proposes to change that role and the authority and oversight of conservation authorities. So it does take natural heritage, which currently we have relationships with our conservation authorities to support that review, and move that out of the conservation authorities realm and into the municipalities realm, where we're less equipped to do that review without bringing on additional resources and developing additional systems of how to complete that work. So it does profoundly also change the role of the public in the development process by eliminating those appeal rights and public meetings for subdivisions, condominiums, which are some of our most impactful meetings and impactful types of applications. So it is definitely something that has a lot of concerns. So this in the next slide is, these are the last slides that we'll have as part of the formal presentation. These changes are definitely significant. There's the environmental registration comments that can be provided, and certainly Scott, through his council, will be providing comments. We'll be providing staff comments as we won't have the chance to get a council meeting before the November 24th date, but we will be certainly bringing reports forward to council as the regular meeting schedule gets established. So happy to answer any questions if there are any. I know there was lots happening in the chat there as we were presenting, and I'll leave that up to Megan in terms of how you want to deal with those.
Yeah, lots of questions, lots and lots of questions. I am tracking them here, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But before we do, I just want to, Tim, if you are still with us. Yep, perfect. Yeah, just I guess, so Tim Lanthier, he is the CAO of the Grey Sauble Conservation Authorities. And obviously tons of implications, and thanks for sharing the link in the chat to your official comments. Just on a high level, is there anything about, I guess, both Bill 109 and Bill 23 that you want to highlight that you think are big implications?
Sure. Thank you, Megan. Good evening, everyone. I think for us, Bill 23 definitely substantially more impactful to the conservation authorities and to our municipal partners in terms of the relationship that conservation authorities have with them. Some of the key areas that we see, Claire touched on most of them. The opportunity for our permitting process to be overridden where planning approvals have gone through poses some concern for us. There's certainly areas where that could be an acceptable process to exempt a permit subject to a suite of conditions, but those conditions are so nuanced that putting in a broad blanketed legislative change doesn't necessarily cover it. And we have concerns there that natural hazards, so flood, erosion, dynamic beach, won't be effectively addressed, or at least have the potential to not be effectively addressed, and that the standards of the current PPS may not be upheld. One of our biggest concerns is our role in natural heritage commenting. So across the province, there are 36 conservation authorities, and for a large part, we act as commenting partners for our municipalities on the areas of natural heritage, so wetlands, valley lands, significant wildlife habitat, things of that nature. We have a provincial mandate to comment on natural hazard, flood and erosion. We'll continue to do that. But the natural heritage piece we provide as a service to our municipal partners at a very cost-effective rate. We have experts in-house that have been doing this for decades. They have the ability to lean on a team of experts within the natural heritage realm within our organization. And then that team of experts has the capacity to lean on the other conservation authorities across the province. Removal of this function from conservation authorities is going to leave a major gap for our municipal partners. So as Claire mentioned, there's the capacity or the potential for municipalities to either bring these staff on themselves, bring them on at the county level, or to hire consultants. But the reality is that local based corporate knowledge that's decades and decades old will be lost if that happens. And so a consultant coming in to deal with this doesn't necessarily have that background knowledge. To put some perspective on this too, Grey Sauble alone sees 600 planning applications in a year. So if you magnify that across the province, across 36 conservation authorities, finding a consultant that can do this is going to be challenging. Bringing in teams at the county level is not impossible. It can be done, but that network of experts and that corporate knowledge will be lost. So for us, this poses an issue to us as our business model, but it poses a bigger issue for our municipal partners and the impacts that it's going to have on them. So our comments back to the province are not that conservation authorities must be the commenting agency for natural hazards. Our comment back to the province is that these agreements and memorandums of understanding are developed at a local level between conservation authorities and local municipalities where a local need exists. Municipalities don't have to sign those agreements, but where that local need exists and it makes fiscal sense and it makes efficiency sense, that those agreements should be allowed to be signed and that the province shouldn't get involved in that and disrupt the system. So really for us, those are the two big keys. The idea of freezing our fees doesn't make sense to us, and it certainly doesn't help with the province's goal of more houses built faster. If you want more homes built faster, you need to resource the review that's going in to make sure that those more houses that are built faster are built responsibly and built sustainably. And you can't do that by cutting the resources out that provide that review. Then the final item I'll touch on is that Claire had mentioned that one of the things the province has mentioned is that through the land inventories that conservation authorities are already required to do by the end of December, by the end of 2024, that's already written into the Conservation Authorities Act. They've added a new piece that will say, we also need to look at these lands and see which of them could be suitable for housing development or residential development. That's been poorly defined at this point to say what the true impetus is and what level of residential development are we talking about. So honestly, I do believe that these changes are geared at the GTA and the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and that rural Ontario is unfortunately caught in the crossfire, but nonetheless, these changes are happening, and we need to be mindful of this. We need to educate ourselves on this, and we need to make informed comments to the province that identify what the problems are and what the solutions are to move forward effectively.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Tim. Yeah, at this point, I want to pull in. We're lucky to have Wayne Caldwell on the call. He's a professor and the program coordinator at the University of Guelph's Rural Planning Program and longtime planner, most of his career in Huron County. Wayne, anything in this bill keeping you up at night, or do you think it will actually result in more homes built faster? And what do you think about Tim's comment that rural Ontario is kind of caught in the crossfire?
Yeah, no, great questions, Megan, and thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I try not to keep awake at nights with these kinds of things, but this is coming really close, I must say. And I would also say just a real pleasure to follow after Scott and Claire. I think you folks are really fortunate to have two of the leading planners in the province at the helm in your municipalities. So great comments from them. And I, like everyone else, am still trying to learn what this is all about in terms of what it will mean in practice over time and how it impacts things. But I did make a few scribbles to myself as the presentations went on, just to flag a couple of things that strike me. I think housing is like motherhood, right? Few of us can argue about the validity of creating more housing, more affordable housing, diverse kinds of housing. The real question is the province currently going about it the right way? And I think there's all kinds of questions around that people can look at. Three or four things that would come close to keeping me up, Megan, at nights would be the Greenbelt and the sacrifice of agricultural land within the Greenbelt. I just think that's it's short-sighted. It says a lot to the farm community about how the province views agriculture in this province, in my view, and they view other uses as more important than agriculture. And it's not to say that agriculture is always going to be sacrosanct, but it is important. And I think that there's a message there that I think is really important. I'm also still trying to learn what this will mean for upper tier planning. It's interesting for those of you who are of my age, you will remember that when regional governments were created in this province, it was a huge issue in rural Ontario. We didn't want to see anything of it, but in the urban areas where they were created, there was generally a recognition that regional governments were required in order to deal with the growth and the planning that was going to happen in those jurisdictions over the following decades. And that's exactly the role that those regions have played. And the whole notion of sabotaging that, in my view, and taking them out of the system is again, not founded in good practice, in my view. And also, and Tim will appreciate this comment, I had written it down before he spoke. I just think it's really sad to see, in my view, the gutting of conservation authorities in many ways. And it's not only now, it's going back over the last while as well. And I think conservation authorities, my own personal experience on our farm has been nothing but positive in terms of working with folks. And it's not to say that things always have to stay the same. Of course, things do need to evolve and change. But I just think there's lots of good that has been done by CAs over the decades. And we're stepping away from that. And I think maybe the final comment I'll make, just to not take up too much time, is the whole notion of balance. And in my view, what we had achieved in the province was a relative balance between different kinds of interests. And this is of all governments over history. And, the role of conservative governments, the role of liberal governments, and the NDP government that we had as well. It was a balance in the sense of balance between policy, balance to us as ratepayers in terms of having a reasonable expectation of being involved in the planning system. And I think, balance for the agricultural community as well, that agriculture was viewed as being valuable. And it's not that it's not still, but we have, I think, taken a blow in that regard as an industry. So, and the final thing connected to that is for municipalities as well. I like to distinguish between red tape and green tape. Red tape would be those things that we will all have encountered at some point in time that we say is not required, it's unnecessary. But I would say there's a huge amount of green tape that we as members of society benefit from, whether it be making sure that the water I drink is clean and not an issue, to protecting farmland, to not allowing people to build in floodplains. There's a whole series of appropriate regulations. And I just want to hope that as a province, as a society, we don't throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. So anyway, that's my maybe more of a stance than it was. But anyway, that's how I'm feeling about things at the moment. So thanks again, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. It's certainly a very well-informed stance. So we're happy to hear it. We do have another panelist, but just before I get to that, just because you were talking about agriculture, and we do have Paul Vickers joining us as well of the Grey County Federation of Agriculture. Paul, what are your thoughts, hearing Wayne's comments and thinking about the implications for agriculture in the province and specifically in Grey and Bruce? Anything that you want to add or any reactions?
Yep, thanks Megan for inviting me. And Bill 23 is kind of a mixed bill. Like there's things in it that we as agriculture really like. There's things in it that we could probably do without. There's only three things that can save agriculture, and those three things is density, density, and density. That's the only way we can stop allowing large tracts of farmland to be swallowed up for housing. So Bill C-23 addresses that. They want to see more density in urban areas and urban settings. Places that have water and sewer lines are the places that housing needs to go. And there was a comment in the chat there earlier on about tiny houses. And I look at tiny houses as, it sounds really good and it's really good in theory, but it's just really an apartment that takes up more land than an apartment building would. The only way to get through this, to get enough houses built in Ontario to get these 1.5 million units built, is to get into apartment style buildings with 5+ stories. And I don't know what else to say, but the reason why I think this bill is being introduced, and this is just a bit of my own opinion, is because there's too much NIMBYism. When we have brown fields inside our urban settings, There's just too many people. I got a little dog here that wants to be outside, and she's got a bit of a whine to her. There's a reason why this bill is coming through. Is because when you try and develop brownfield where there is water and sewer lines, where you're close to supermarkets and stores, there's just too much NIMBYism. There's a comment in the chat by Bill who said, we got to slow developers down as much as we possibly can. And I feel this is why we have this bill coming through, is because there's just too much of people wanting to slow development down. And if it's good development and proper development in the proper place, then we shouldn't be trying to slow it down. We should be trying to accelerate it. And not everything good about this bill is not everything about this bill is good, but I can see the reasoning behind it. And if we don't stop trying to use up farmland, we're just going to keep losing, our one resource that we have. Other countries have realized this and know what it's all about. I just think we're a little bit slower to picking up on it. And for everybody to live in a detached home on a large lot, I don't think it's practical or good for the environment. You think how much carbon is used to build a single dwelling home as compared to an apartment style condominium type building. When we talk about climate change, we have to look at everything. We can't just pick and choose what we want to look at. So I see a lot of good reasons why we want to increase our density. And I as a farmer, I don't really see any bad things about it. I know people don't like it, and it's a tough pill to swallow. But I think that's just, we have to decide whether they're going to live on big lots without a lot of food, or we're going to live on smaller lots with food for everybody. So those are my comments, Megan. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think it's an important, I also just think about the municipal lens that you're also familiar with. And when we concentrate in our downtowns, that's also a cost savings to municipalities, like sending garbage trucks and snow plows down all these rural roads is an expensive endeavor. And we are very privileged in Grey and Bruce County to live in our single detached dwellings all spread out on large lots. But it also requires servicing, like in Lions Head and Tobermory, we don't have complete servicing in our downtowns. So if we want to intensify, we're going to have to find the money to do that, which the province isn't necessarily being as helpful in that regard as they once were. So yeah, lots of challenges is there for sure.
Megan, if I could just add a little bit more, I think you're dead on about the servicing and increasing the larger footprint to have to service that. And it's not just in the first years when maybe the developers pay for those services going in. 25 years down the road, those services will have to be replaced, and we can't afford it. We don't have enough taxpayer dollars to pay for the replacement of those services. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up there.
Mm-hmm. And it's not going to get any easier. Like I was listening to a good interview on CBC with the Mayor of Barrie, and just by slashing development charges, municipalities have very limited mechanisms they can use to pay for the services that we need, and this infrastructure that's going to need to be replaced. And then now, if the province is now removing one of those huge revenue sources, that's certainly going to make things tighter on the municipal end. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Julie Scarcella, who we're lucky to have joining with us tonight, and hopefully she can maybe shed a little bit of light to what extent Bill 23 is going to help in the housing regard, and what other things might help more. Julie is a consultant and subject matter expert to support housing for all, a technical professional in green building, climate change, sustainability guru for over 25 years. She's a successful entrepreneur, visionary, and founder of several green building initiatives, companies, and nonprofit organizations. Her commitment to walk the talk and fearless ability to question the norm has led to the development of numerous innovative, deep, healthy, and green solutions. And with that, over to you, Julie.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm super grateful and super inspired with the folks that just said what you just said, because I'm just gonna bounce my presentation off what you guys were just noting. So really grateful to be here. So today I will be echoing a little bit about, the Bill 23 and really, grappling into this, the housing challenge and, and flavoring everybody a little bit about, how can we get there? So Megan, you already did my bio. Thank you. But I wanted just to quickly share with you 3 things that really inspire me and that I'm super passionate about, which is the technical components of working in green buildings, but also the tools and practices that go with it. I pride myself of working with the development community as well as the architects and the engineers of the world at making things practical for them to meet targets. And innovation is really for me what's drawn me into this space and stayed in this space for so long was my introduction to the work that I did do in the UK for 4 years and that phenomenal journey of working in the UK has allowed me to bring back some different thinking here. And just recently, for the last 5 years, moved into a different angle of building science, which allowed me to evolve into design for dementia, both for aging in place, but also for long-term care. And I've been grounded down with working on the Campus of Care project in the town of Blue Mountains by providing them with some leadership on the design for dementia, which is an area of work that's somewhat very new in Canada. So I will be speaking about 4 buckets: the problem, the opportunity facing Bill 23, the future vision, what could we, and what moving the needle a little bit to what could be potential solutions, and sharing with you some next steps. So Bill 23, as we've all just heard the wake of what's been happening, truly we can't be at the expense of it being, removing the low carbon and the climate resilient future that we've all been so working on for some of us decades. And, really it's been a decade of progress on green buildings and policy and other climate change projects. Over the past number of years, myself, even working on the Toronto Green Building Council in Toronto for 10 years, those early days work would be abolished. So really from, just like all of us, staying the course, but truly it means stripping the cities of the right to consider sustainability and climate and the development of the planning process, and gutting the Toronto and other green standards, either in process or already established. So really, truly, we should never have to choose between sustainability and affordability. We shouldn't have one or the other. So really stay the course. We stay true to what we are working on right now, which is, of course, writing letters and pushing the envelope. And if we all have to march downtown to be in front of Ford, let's make that happen. Because we can't abolish the decades of work and phenomenal work in protecting our precious Ontario green space. So on the flip side of dealing with the housing crisis and Bill 23 and looking for innovative ways and different ways, is Ford's way for building more houses, stellar? Probably not. But what we are all very much realizing that not only is Ford's way could be challenges of how we scale up more affordable housing, but clearly the federal government is struggling as well. With the most recent reports released this summer and late fall, the evidence has been mounting that the supply housing chain is broken in this country, and the federal government cannot achieve affordability for everyone. They cannot do it on their own. They are looking and seeking for new innovative ways to make it happen. And they're really leaning in on the private sector to look at other ways to make it happen. So envision this for our region, a South Georgian Bay Housing Development Corporation, ensuring that every citizen in our region has options for good choices for living in their fullest potential, an arm's length not-for-profit to deliver housing with an exceptionally strong board of directors, that knows the built environment, including net zero and sustainability, with the expertise that would allow for centralized resources for developing and delivering housing throughout the regions. I'm missing an S there. It would really entice and deliver housing from Bruce County to Grey County to Simcoe. We're all facing the exact same issues in rural. Every single municipality is facing the exact same issues. So what could be this other way? It means about collaboration in a whole different mindset and working together and creating an organization that could really rapidly move on housing. And it really is about working with public and private sectors to create increased housing supply and affordability. So I do think that there is an absolute unmet and gaps that haven't been realized in the region yet in terms of supporting a potential regional development corporation. I think absolutely it needs and it can deliver on a strong vision to support environment, social, and governance, which poorly has seen, and other not-for-profits in the region have struggled there. I think there's an opportunity for driving the private-public collaboration partnerships and providing that operational capacity and support from a board expertise with delivering all different types of housing, the skills and the tools. Absolutely, we have to reduce the issues that are happening on duplication and the silos that are happening along the regions on housing. There is not enough critical resources to help developers and builders to get more shovels in the ground. And we need to hire locals to execute and establish and work with the existing committees that we already have. There's some great task force happening in housing, but we're working in silos. So embracing this opportunity of a one-stop shop of a development corporation that would really hone in on green skills for the trades, leveraging the funding, which is something that we have not been doing, and pooling the resources that we really need to have. Whether you're in Tobermory, Owen Sound, Markdale, Collingwood, it makes no difference on the requirements that is needed for a developer and some of the tools needed for the municipalities. And sorry, it froze there for a sec. And I think best practices is something that has been ignored regionally. There has been other entities, other development corporations, other housing corporations that have done a great job. They have struggled too at getting more housings in the ground, but they've done it. And there's so much we can learn from them. And there's so much that they want to share with us. There's tools that they're doing, processes that they're doing. Now, I realize some of them are not rural, but some of the things that they are doing can be applicable. We just simply need to figure out a way to collaborate efficiently. And the number of these not-for-profits, whether they're development corporations or housing authorities, where they manage the uses, manage units versus developing the buildings or homes, they're willing to share. They're willing to step up. They want to see us successful. So there is an opportunity to really learn, lean in, and make a difference. So imagine a one-stop shop. If we had a regional development corporation that really had these critical services, partners that would be helping us get there. We would be working with other developers, get shovel in the ground, but we would also be an entity for delivering on executing housing as well. We would be working with existing volunteer committees, but executing new ones for the execution of a number of things that's needed. And I also think that the opportunity of not just a one-stop shop, but it's sharing critical information that needs to be shared within the region. So this proposed opportunity of a not-for-profit development corporation could be delivering services to support home ownership for housing, rental, but clear sustainability standards and guidelines and templates for the development community and for the municipalities. We don't have draft RFPs for providing clear performance requirements for passive house and net zero. through RFP processes right now. And if we do, we're writing them from scratch, or we're hiring expensive consultants to do the work. We just need to have these templates available to meet performance requirements and have the developers and or builders and others follow compliance for meeting net zero. RFPs are one example. Passive house design guidelines for Part 9 buildings, a roster of common suppliers, prefab suppliers, tiny homes, modular housing, container homes, and seniors options. Imagine if we had a place to go to access these roster of other suppliers that are doing great work. And I think critically in sustainability is the adoption rate of low carbon technologies. If we're going to push and move towards net zero, we need to look at having available training within the region to help with boots on the ground. Then moving up the scale here at looking at funding applications. I know a number of developers have no idea about how to write a CMHC seed application. And there is funding for them for any project to advance for seed application. And there is funding for pilot for GMF funding, but they take work from the municipal side and on the development side. So there is this one-stop shop that can help provide some critical resources. Important to note for resources and tools and practices is financial costing. What we don't have and what we critically need as a proposed development corporation are financial pro formas for the developers, for the builders, for 4-story, it could be for residential compliance meeting towards net zero. They need to have access to critical tools, and we shouldn't have to every affordable housing project has to go through a financial lens. Well, let's make some of these tools available for them. There's also needs to be a roster, a pre-approved rosters of qualified professionals in the region that can help us get there. We don't have that. And there are way other financial tools that we could be providing as a service and really leveling the playing field here at providing value to get housing happening. The last bullet in yellow is leveraging all the new planning process policies that are underway. I wanted to share this information with you with CMHC. The CMHC released the Housing Supply Challenge last year for pre-development process. It was a call for proposal across Canada asking for experts. They needed the help. They wanted the help. They wanted to see innovation, and they received 167 solutions. They shortlisted to 29, and now 14 prototypes across Canada are going to be developed. Well, is anyone in this region accessing any of those 14 prototypes that are going to be developed in the next year, 2 years? Maybe this regional not-for-profit can access and continually update new tools and new services that are being developed across Canada that could be leveraged here. It's about capacity. So just to echo the CMHC and the solutions of tools and practices and what could be potentially armed here is CMHC funded ANCO Innovation Lab, and in a partnership with Simcoe County, they are delivering the One Ontario platform. It's a one-window digital platform to streamline the residential development approvals for affordable housing. So it's now underway. They've been ANCO Innovation in partnership with Simcoe County received the 2.35 million, and they're building it with pilots rolling out within Simcoe. A lot of excitement. This means the opportunity to bring this value here to Gray and Bruce. So there's all these great resources and tools that are happening out there, but we need to harness them. We need to arm ourselves and bring them here and potentially really support some other ways to fast track housing. I could go on and on about some of the other projects like the Brampton project with the concierge program, the land banking. There's some amazing stuff that's happening right now, but I'm nearing the end of the presentation and I really wanted us to think about a pilot. If we could come together, 3 municipalities, one in Bruce, one in Gray, and one in Simcoe, and together we do a proof of concept. We partner to make a not-for-profit happen. we work together on a shared vision, and we arm ourselves with the opportunities of what needs to get done. And it means more housing. It means efficiencies. It means working far more faster than we are right now. Imagine how strong we can be together. And I really, really, truly believe that if we work more efficiently together, and support the municipalities, support the development community, enable them with these resources and tools, we'll get there. I'd like to have a quick shout out to Yasmin. She's on the call tonight. She's my strategic advisor, and she was great at helping me review my PowerPoint and provide some amazing input. So a shout out to Yasmin. She was very helpful with my presentation, and to you all for listening to me and hopefully inspired to take some further action to support climate change and driving our affordable housing agenda in the region. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. I think you certainly present a super compelling vision. And I think that, like, obviously this forum is one element of Grey Bruce collaboration and how we are stronger together, and as we can connect with different municipalities, and because there really aren't that many forums where we're all working together. And I think too, like, we can't expect for-profit long-term care homes to solve the senior care crisis. We can't expect that for-profit developers are going to solve our affordable housing crisis. We need all these different players at the table. And I think the nonprofit sector, there's incredible potential for some really amazing public-private nonprofit collaborations in order to kind of benefit the community and meet these multi-solving objectives, as we talked about last month on the Climate Forum. I'm just gonna pull a question. We will go back to some of the other ones, but Barry, your question was, I think, applicable for Julie. And it was, how do the current economic development corporations, county planning departments fit into the proposed regional development corporation or the regional nonprofit housing corp? Do you want to speak to that, Julie?
I can speak to the counties because we have reached out to Grey and we have reached out to Simcoe, and you know, they are there to support. I mean, one, they're releasing RFPs to support housing projects, which a not-for-profit like this could actually submit on. But we can also work in partnership and collaboration with the counties, understanding their mandates, their housing, you know, where are they at for their housing planning? What kind of housing are they planning? And the locations of those planning opportunities. So Barry, I think the county's relationships with working with other not-for-profits has been underway. And in other counties, they do have collaborations with other not-for-profits, but you do need to be a not-for-profit, and you need to have the skill set, and you need to have the skills to be able to execute on one, delivering on a housing project, but also understanding, you know, what's in it for them, what's in it for a not-for-profit. There has to be that clear mandate of who's doing what. Clearly, the counties are trying to execute more housing. So are the municipalities. And I think, you know, in hindsight, some of the municipalities have absolutely struggled. You know, so in terms of economic development, Barry, I haven't gone there yet. It's a good question. How could the economic regional corporations play a role in this? That's a very good question. And that's something I would do a bit more digging on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Just kind of another piece of housing, Chris, if you're there, we have the mayor of Brockton, Chris Peabody, on, and if some of you read the headlines, Brockton just recently got an MZO approved, a ministerial zoning order. So, you know, we're looking at Bill 23 and the big bad province bringing all these sweeping changes. However, there are some little examples of processes or ways that the province can work for us to get the types of housing that we need in our communities, and us as planners and municipal councils. I like to think that we're the experts in our own communities, and then you can go out and ask the province for what you need. Why did you do that? and kind of what do you see? Yeah, I think you have some interesting partners around the table, including some nonprofits, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, what was that process like?
Process? Well, the process started a year ago, and so it was long before the destruction of the Greenbelt and Bill 23 blew up, although the whole project was thrown in into the news cycle at the same time as the Greenbelt on the Friday night at 9 o'clock. And so it's a little bit of a coincidence. Unfortunate from the Brockton side that it sort of got mixed into that, although it hasn't been really picked up in the news cycle. So we, given the fact that we had a desperate need in Walkerton for rental housing, we've got a lot of small scale manufacturers as well as small scale agricultural producers that simply do not have any rental accommodation for people. So small example, there's a Indian restaurant opening today, and they absolutely cannot find a single apartment for their cook, who's now driving up from Brampton. And that's just a little side note that I heard of today when I went into the restaurant to welcome them. So to get a push for rental housing, we have a industrial park, a business park on the top of Walkerton and overlooking the river valley. And some of the land there had not been developed or purchased by any business uses in 20 years. It's a very scenic piece of land. So I had the idea that maybe it would be better suited for housing, but soon found out to rezone that we needed to do a business justification study for that, which would be quite complicated. And so this whole experience will be useful to the Owen Sound councillors, Carol and John, and the board members from Glassworks. It's one route to go, maybe not. Turned out to be a little bit of an ordeal. So we got together some developers, 4, including a nonprofit group doing a residential hospice. They're all local. 2 of them were local developers. One was from Hamilton. And so it involves 4 different pieces of land. There's a 5th piece of land that did expand the urban boundary. And that will be, we needed that to replace the business park land that was being lost. And it will also include a forest, a swamp forest that we're going to preserve and name in honor of the farmer that did sell us that. So it'll be Zettler Woods. So the process was that we had to, it wasn't so straightforward. We had to hire a private planning company to do a report. The key thing the province wanted was a public meeting, as well as support from SON. That was the most critical thing that they wanted in the process. If SON support hadn't been there, they would not have granted it. So that was interesting. But we were county councillor certainly eager in the next term to repair the relationship that the county has had in the past with SON. I think that's very important. We just did settle the treaty 2 years after Grey County did, but so it's something that's important. So we were careful to include that. And so after we got the public meeting and the consent from SON, we submitted that to the minister, but they did drag it out quite a bit. So the project will consist of 500 housing units, and most of them rentals. So there will be 3 5-story apartments and 1 6-story apartment building for a retirement home. That's the Hamilton company. And then the balance will be townhomes, which there aren't a lot of in the project. So it will fulfill that need for rental housing. And in putting the deal together, we focused more on the attainable housing level because we were eager to work with the developers that were willing to come to Walkerton. So, and I don't think the province. I got the sense that I don't know. Maybe they didn't like that a small player was in the MZO game because, well, the minister didn't even announce it. Lisa Thompson, she texted me on a Saturday morning and said, "You got your MZO?" And I said, "Could I have the reference?" And she said, "Go look it up yourself on the Ontario.ca website." And so that's how I found out. And it is, it has been registered as a regulation under the Planning Act. But 2 weeks after, I still have not gotten a call from the minister. So I think I got the sense these MZOs are really for the bigger players down in the cities, and we just sort of snuck in there, and perhaps we're a wee bit unwelcome, just given the timeline that it took a whole year.
Yeah. Well, they've been busy with lots of other announcements, so maybe it's still on the to-do list. Just quickly, Scott and Claire, do you want to jump in? We have a question here about MZO and municipal role. I thought the municipality had to request it, but surely an MZO is sought because a municipality is objecting. Yeah, do you want to provide some?
Well, we requested the rezoning from Business Park 1 to high density residential. So we did request it, and that was a key component. So the Owen Sound groups here, I'm very interested in what's happening with Glassworks. I know that some of the council members were not in support of Glassworks. I saw that, and was disappointed that the council up there was not supporting Glassworks the last term of council. But I know we've got a new council up there, so you'll have to decide if you want to, no matter what you do, if you do a rezoning of that property or the MZO, you're going to have to get council support, and the more councillors, the better to push that forward. But a bare majority will do. So I'm not sure where your mayor is on that, but you know, the one candidate, he was against it, but certainly it'd be great to see how that all works out with Glassworks, because it is a different model, being a nonprofit, and love to see how it works going forward.
I'm just wondering if we want to go back to some of the earlier questions for Claire and Scott around sort of capping on communities. I know Bill's been really interested in that, right? Bill Moses. How do we kind of cap the numbers on the Owen Sound development? So there's a few themes. I'm hoping we can kind of package some together, because I know our time is getting on here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If Chris, if you just want to answer a couple of questions in the chat, people are just asking about density and price point. If you're able to, just in the interest of time. But yeah, Scott, do you want to weigh in terms of the kind of population planning? Kind of one of those early questions was around growth, but the idea of having a stable level of population. How big should Owen Sound get to achieve level efficient population? And then I'll also combine it with a question around what you think the likelihood would be of a max house size. So we're starting to see minimums be eliminated, but if you think there ever would be, could foresee a maximum.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Megan, and to those that submitted it. With respect to population projections, and certainly invite Claire to weigh in here as well. The province requires upper tiers across the province to forecast those population projections and to update them. What I will say there is you know, that's a very educated best guess. But looking too far ahead, you know, more than about 20-25 years is very difficult to do. You know, we can look at demographic patterns, and we can look at different bubbles as they move through the system. So, you know, we had the baby boom, and you know, what happened as the baby boom started to enter schools, what happened as they started to enter the workforce, what happens as they start to enter our long-term care homes. certain things are somewhat predictable, but other elements of population growth can be slightly more atypical or more difficult to predict. So as we see more and more new Canadians coming to our area, what's that going to do to change our population numbers? As we see more and more retirees choosing our area, what does that do when we have more houses, in some cases smaller houses, but maybe less kids in our schools and our minor sports and recreation programs and everything else? So at Gray, what we do is we work with the consultants to update those numbers, but then it's sort of a constant check-in. Just as a bit of an anecdote, after the province assigned us this role, the first time Gray did one of these studies was in 2007. And in 2007, everything looked so rosy and we were just going to grow. And then 2008 hit and we hit a global recession and we didn't see that growth that we thought we would. So the one lesson we've learned is you look at those projections, but you're constantly reassessing. And a key piece of sustainability there is also the economic sustainability. So do we have the jobs? Do we have the workforce that will feed our economy, that will cause people to want to move here, that will cause people to want to raise children here, and what are we doing to support not only the housing, but the workforce and sort of the economic markets across our county. I don't know if that totally answers the question, but I don't know if Claire wants to weigh in on the similar role in Bruce County.
Yeah, I won't, in the interest of time, I won't add a lot, but I'll just echo that the work that Scott does is very much work that our staff are doing in Bruce County, and I'm working in partnership with our municipalities to do that. We spend a lot of time with we engage specialized consultants who help with those population projections and look at how that growth gets split out across our county, and we have very specific methodologies that the province puts in place for us to do that have to be followed, that sometimes interestingly cause challenges. One good example is the work that Mayor Peabody is doing in Brockton, which it was really a provincial regulation that caused some challenges to be able to have the flexibility to do what Brockton needed to do to address their own housing crisis. So just to loop that back into the MZO, there are instances where, such as in Brockton's case, it made sense for the municipality to ask for an MZO in order to kind of get that exemption to kind of the provincial rules around how to deal with urban boundary expansions. Whereas in other instances, what we've seen, and certainly much more press around, is where we have private developers that are approaching the province to undertake MZOs, to which municipalities are often party to, but aren't necessarily initiating it. So just to kind of loop back into the MZOs and how that fits into the equation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claire. Also, Claire, there was an earlier question about how much leeway do Gray and Bruce Planning have to continue on the current strategy, which includes taking into account advice from conservation authorities, densification, in view of Bill 23. Can municipalities work around these damaging legislative changes that the Ford government is proposing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Bill 109 came along and 444 municipalities thought really concretely around the changes and looked at our planning system more broadly and had workarounds for that, in the sense that we make sure that applications are much more complete and really near a finished product before they get declared complete and come into the system in order to help us preserve fees. That one was a fairly straightforward scenario. I would say Bill 23, because of just the broad reaching changes, it is going to be very difficult for municipalities to kind of keep the system how it is, even in a creative way, when we don't have the legal authority to do certain things. appeals aren't going to be permitted to be filed with the Ontario Land Tribunal. That's nothing that municipalities can work around. And, we want to make sure that the province is going to do some communications around that, because even just today, a very frustrated citizen who's upset with the county and the local municipality because they don't have appeal rights on a plan of subdivision are writing to the letters of edit the local newspaper. And we absolutely understand folks' frustrations, but that's a scenario where county level government, local government don't have the rights to override what the Ontario Land Tribunal will receive. So there can be creativity, and we often work in places of gray. No, pun aside, Scott. I'm sure you've heard that one before. But at the same time, we work in a really collaborative way. For example, I work with a group of planners right across the region with the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus to provide comments and feedback in. I also sit as part of AMO's planning task force, and AMO, if anyone hasn't seen that, did a really good submission just today in terms of Bill 23. So, we can't necessarily work around things, but we can certainly voice our opinion and our concerns in the right places and do that in a really unified way. And that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we are creatures of the province, and so there's only so much we can do, but certainly having some resolutions come from counties and municipalities, I think helps. A couple of other people that we have joined, and there's just been so many questions and so much conversation. One being Keith Reed, project coordinator for alternative land use services. Keith, do you have any reflections, anything to add based on the conversation?
Yeah, thanks. Nothing really more to add other than the fact that I think that when we think of agriculture land, we're not only thinking of the food that it produces, but also the ecosystem benefits that land does provide. So we have a lot of sponge effect, where it's not a permeable surface. So the importance of that is hard to measure. So anyways, great discussion and lots of comments, and glad to be a part of it tonight.
And we also have Peggy Hutchison. Peggy, based on what you've heard, so you've been working in the space of better planning for a long time as the founder of the Grey Association for Better Planning since 1990. What are your thoughts?
Well, I just today wrote a little summary of what the organization was. I mean, one of the things, the lack of appeals. One time, the municipality of Artemisia appealed something that was approved by the Ministry of Environment, which was a permit to take water, and they wanted to do a water bottling near Artemisia. And so the Artemisia appealed it. They're just a small municipality. And our group added ourselves as a party and took on the issue of agriculture. This company was trying to tell the farmers that they would have to move because they want to take the water to drink. The other issue was there was fish habitat. So we had to pull in the Ministry of the Canada Environment, Fisheries and Oceans experts from Owen Sound to come and speak to that. Anyway, at the end of the day, so we were a party to that. So we called expertise on that. The OMB permitted it or whatever. And we just said, well, this is insane. So through a lot of research, we ended up taking it to the Superior Court in Toronto, and we're successful. Well, then the company appealed it. So we still hadn't paid our lawyers. So we went to, and this was, by then, it was now Grey Highlands. Artemisia, Euphrasia, Osprey became part of Grey Highlands. So we went up brought our lawyer up from Toronto and went to visit them and say, can you loan us the money so we can finish paying him, so we can, address this appeal. And maybe you could send out a letter on our behalf to all the members of AMO, which was for $500, and ask them each for $400. And they did. And we got 400 from a lot, we got 100, or sometimes just sorry, we were broke, but good luck. Anyway, that year, and then we were successful. I think the company withdrew. But the when Prairie Highlands went to the first AMO meeting that year in the fall, everybody knew who Grey Highlands was. And the idea that we can help each other get to the right decision. So I'm certainly going to be speaking to lack of appeals. It did mention, I thought, that not neighbors or whatever, but certain public bodies. So I'd like to know who those would be. Normally you might go to a pre-hearing and they would say, yes, you can appeal it, or no, you're just, there's no basis for your appeal. Anyway, the other thing was that I did today, was trying to, just before this meeting started, I had asked to be to go and present to the committee. And last week I signed on, they gave me a notification, and then I never heard from them. I kept checking my email. Unbeknownst to me, because of the water level and the snow and everything else, our phone lines, which are corroding underwater, were not working. So I didn't find out until Wednesday, when I was either going to go to Toronto yesterday or today, that no, they hadn't chosen me, and they probably Googled me and decided not to let me come and speak. So I was trying to get this submitted by 7 p.m. I'm not used to doing this. At 6:59, I pressed submit, and my page was too long, so it was still transmitting it. And our internet here is low, so it was slow at sending it out. And so then up popped that said, you missed the deadline. So I'm glad to see that actually there's a November 24th deadline for CAs and for wetland evaluation. So I will certainly meet that, but I will send it personally to everybody on that committee as well. I'm just shocked that they would make these changes or even propose them without the kind of consultation with all the municipalities, AMO, planners, conservation authorities. And if I will send this to Joyce Hall, it was through Joyce that I was invited to attend this. I'll send my submission. It's very, very short. It just, and it was verbal. It said, it gave some links to some things that I quoted, but basically it was explaining how conservations work. It's like filling a bathtub. You can have it full, and then you can put in a rock, and if you put in another rock, it starts to overflow. And so if you want to manage it, you have to take something out. If you put in a sponge, it just soaks up the water and it floats. And people don't seem to understand what managing a watershed. I live at the top of, there are five, there should be five. The Grand River, actually just south of me, Osprey Township should have 5 conservation authorities. But on my farm, I know water. I grew up in Richmond Hill next to Don Head Farms, which is the head of the Don River. We sat on our veranda and watched Hurricane Hazel, and it's stuck in my head ever since. Every time we drove to Toronto, my father would point out why he couldn't get home, the Don River overflowing, houses gone, people killed. And it doesn't happen that often, but the conservation, the research station in Maple, all our neighbors belong there and work. As kids growing up, they all explained how they work, what they do, how they manage water. And so I've made a little blurb for anybody who doesn't understand how conservation authorities work.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for weighing in and for all the work that you do and continue to do. I'm determined to end by 9 o'clock. That's what the instructions that Jenny gave, even though such great conversation. So just very quickly, I will just circle back to our amazing panelists. Any closing remarks?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to come and equally learn from your members and your questions and your interests. Always a pleasure to and look forward. I'm sure this is the first of many opportunities that hopefully Scott and I can co-present around these issues. And I think we heard from Julie the strength and the value in numbers and looking at things regionally. So thank you for the opportunity, and happy to come back if there's other topics of interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like the group is certainly engaged in land use planning. So yeah, don't be surprised if you get another invite back. And yeah, really great. I've been a longtime advocate for Grey Bruce collaboration. So really great to have, both you and Scott at the helms and working together to protect this very special part of the world. Julie, anything you want to add?
It's a lot more alarming than actually I had thought. But I just wanted to share on a positive note, there must have been at least 50 of us, corporate companies, small and large, colleagues of mine that are directors of sustainability at Sun Life to BMO to you name it. Everyone is riding the coattails on writing these letters and getting them to the Ford government. So I think the spin is there, and I think there's a lot that has to change, and I think some solutions also, I mean, besides, throwing darts at the Ford government, I think, clearly we need solutions to the team as well there. So I heard a lot of interesting dialogue tonight as well, learned a lot from everybody. And if you're interested about collaboration on a regional idea for housing, then Megan, reach out to Megan and she can, reach out to me. So thanks for tonight. It was great.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. I certainly think that we can, hopefully gather some folks to, continue developing that.
Well, you've done a great job, Megan. And I know it was we had so many questions that weren't answered, and I'm just wondering how we get to that. And I know Odette Barnicki was going to make a comment as well. And there was so much rich conversation. So we've got probably 20 questions left over. And I'm just wondering how we can go about responding to those. And I'm actually wondering whether Claire and Scott, you'd be willing to do a little bit of responding offline and put some thoughts out there, or whether we need to have another conversation. But I'd really like to be able to get to people's questions, and we had a lot to have on the agenda tonight. And thank you. Lee is giving you the info about the rally tomorrow at MPP Rick Byers' office. So what an amazing evening. We need to keep our eye on land use. We need to keep our eye on sustainable, responsible development. We do the third Thursday of every month, and it's going to be about green jobs and green economy. So look forward to seeing you all then. Mm-hmm. You'll see this on the YouTube channel. I think Lee's probably going to get to it in about 5 days. Keep your eye out for that.
I hope tonight helped everyone realize that planners are at the forefront of legislative changes like Bill 23 and the housing shortage challenges. And if you know a planner, thank them, because often they're on the forefront of being berated by unpopular decisions that are in the best interest of the longer term. So thank you for all the work that you do. And thanks to Julie for coming back to Grey Bruce, and for all the work that you're doing on the regional housing front. Very, very inspiring stuff ahead. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great night.